Ooh, I get all tingly when I hear the music. It's another week of Take Two and the greatest political podcast Utah has ever seen. I just made that up. Anyhow, this is Heidi Hatch with KUTV 2 News. Mara Carabello from the Ixora Group, Greg Hughes, now known for KNRS Radio, and the former Speaker of the House. Every time I say Speaker of the House or House Speaker, I start to sing Les Mis, Master of the House in my head.
Yeah. Nice.
Anyhow, that's what I've got going on.
Is that what you did when you were on the dais as well?
No,
you sang that to yourself?
Keeping it real over here.
Are you?
I don't sing the show tunes.
Are you?
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll
Citizen
believe you on this
nowadays.
one.
Yes.
A lot to talk about this week locally going on, nationally too. I feel like since the Trump administration began, there just keeps being more and more happening constantly.
Ain't
We
that the
can't keep
truth?
all of it, but we know we want to talk local here. So I want to talk about a few things happening. Mara, you brought this up before we started recording, that we should celebrate state superintendent. We have a new one, Molly Hart, and it was a vote 12-2, so overwhelmingly supported.
Yeah, one interesting thing about this process is they opened it up the last round to the public. You could go and throw out questions. I want to say it was a 3-hour block. Then they adjourned and deliberated. They were down to 2 candidates for the public section, and then they elected one. She's filling big shoes. Pretty universally, the outgoing superintendent, who's retiring, is considered successful and had a good relationship with teachers and principals and superintendents, and also had a good relationship with the legislature. So the person coming in is a current board member, only for the last election, though.
Yeah.
Most recently, and also has been the head of a charter school. Interesting, since she is a declared Republican, kind of a new thing. The Republican Party will present 3 names to follow the due course of process.
Okay. Yeah,
Interesting.
that is different. Yeah.
For the governor.
Yep.
But one would think that he would follow the recommendations of the school board.
All right. So it'll
So
be
there were
happening.
other candidates. So when they proffered 3 names,
You and I and her.
we don't know. We don't know
Interesting.
names.
Well, good luck to you too.
But no.
It is an important position. It's something you don't think about often, but I mean, our schools are so important in our communities, so an important role there. And I really want to work with some of our state legislators, our sheriffs now, our speaker. They need to get better publicists or comms directors to let us know what they're up to, because just found out that the sheriffs, Greg, are in Washington, D.C. today. I saw a picture of them with their hats on, their boots.
That's right.
On the lawn there by the White House. What are they up to?
So they have been there for the week, and they have been making the rounds, meeting with Utah delegation, our members of Congress, spent time with Representative Celeste Malloy. When she was a staffer for Chris Stewart, got to really understand some of those issues that intersect between a sheriff, deputy sheriff's, their office, their county, with the federally managed lands and how those relationships work. And so they really do lean on Representative Malloy to help them navigate that. So they spent some good time with her this week. And then they're looking at the illegal immigration with the sense that, every state feels it to some degree. I-15 is a pipeline for a lot of drug trafficking, and this illegal immigration issue is hitting our state. I think the sheriffs are kind of gathering. This is me talking. I don't want to speak exactly for them, but I feel like I know their perspective. Each elected county sheriff, they feel like they're gleaning more from television stories than they are from their personal interactions with maybe the Trump administration. So this week is kind of their time to really drill down on the specific issues that they're seeing, and also how they're going to cooperate together in a productive way. And so those are good meetings to have. And not every state, I don't know how many states get to have those kind of meetings, those face-to-face, but we've got a good, I think we have 18 of our elected county sheriffs out there this week, and those types of discussions are priceless.
Mara, do you think that the Trump administration's holding more of these meetings, getting local leaders in, or are we just talking about it more because we're hearing more about it these days?
I think we're just talking about it more. It's probably a little bit of both. This is an annual event for the sheriffs. I do think the sheriffs are probably getting more access because they're predominantly Republican, and so they're probably. I think it makes sense that a red state gets more access with a Republican with a Republican president.
I will say though that when I was during Trump's first term, I did feel like a lot of presidents up to that point, without regard to party affiliation, probably did most of their interaction with the elected governor of that state. So their state outreach would be with the governors themselves. I thought it was a bit unique back then in the first term that he was calling meetings with state speakers of the House, state Senate presidents, or majority leaders, and even large counties. County commissioners had a platform or a time to come and meet with the administration. If not even Trump himself, then his cabinet members or his agency heads. And so I felt like there was a Rolodex type of thing that you would get when you went there to talk to them, where I could call as speaker directly to the Army Corps of Engineers or to the EPA. And it seemed a little more drilled down than others. And this is just by memory and conversations. A lot of people felt that presidential administrations really hyper-focused and worked most closely with the governors of each respective state.
We were talking, it's probably even a year ago, maybe it was longer than a year ago, about a squabble between our sheriffs and our jails and the ICE offices. So if they're talking illegal immigration, do you think they've gone beyond that, or does that squabble still exist?
I think one of the things, I think you're right. You're remembering that correctly. There's some not seeing the world the same, or there's some issues that were there that aren't about the underlying or overriding issue of illegal immigration. It's just how these entities were working with each other. I think that's one of the things that the sheriffs are working on to make sure that they're on the same page with the administration. They would do this with any administration that intersects with their jurisdiction and what they're called to do and elected to do. If they get the opportunity to make their case and share their perspective, they're going to take that. And they're getting that chance. All
right, we're going to call the sheriffs when they get home. They'll be so excited to hear from us to see what they were up to. Also, while we're on the issue real quickly, while the sheriffs are in D.C., our Utah AG is at the U.S.-Mexico border visiting Yuma, Arizona, talking a little bit about what it means for Utah. Obviously, this is a Republican show. They're down there talking the issues that a lot of voters want them to do. Derek Brown saying that they were saying that, hey, what's happening in Yuma, Arizona is what success of immigration looks like. And he also said, I cannot talk tonight, that Utah is a border state because of the ramifications of what happens on the border. Mara, is it important for our AGs, for our sheriffs, for our congressional leaders to go to the border, or is it just a way to...
It's important for their political careers. It's important for their public relations. It's not policy, but it's okay. It's bringing attention, and he did it well. He said that that the reason we're a border state is because of the fentanyl. Interestingly enough, in Utah, we're going against trend. Our fentanyl use is going up. Everybody else's is going down. So that's something we still need to sort through. Cox put together a fentanyl task force. It's not that we're not focused on it, but if it's true, as many Republicans are asserting, that there's a direct correlation between the number of people and how much drugs we have in America, then one should expect a precipitous drop in fentanyl use because of rounding up people at the border. I am a suspect of that assertion, but nonetheless, Utah still does have a fentanyl problem that is against trend. We're still going up where most of the
new numbers
country
that
is
just
going
came
down.
out on that, which was kind of shocking because everyone else seems to be getting better, but Utah's not. Anything that stuck out from you from that border visit? I did notice that AG Brown actually got to have a heroic moment too. There was another AG. I've just forgotten her name. She must have gotten hot or dehydrated and passed out, and he was there to catch her.
That's
so
great. Oh, nice.
High five. Good job.
I'm a big believer in being on the ground. If your public policy has any kind of touch and it's not, and you're not involved in it wherever you are, going to those places, going and being wherever these issues are happening, or I just think it's important. I really think that it's better than a PowerPoint. It's better than a memo. It's better. I think being on site to understand what's happening and you'll feel it, you'll see it in a way with a context that you don't from, I think, just conversations or even updates or anything else. So I think if our Attorney General going to the border, I think he comes away from that experience, I would imagine, seeing it, even the topography and what it means and how it all works and how it might be difficult to enforce, whatever it might be, being down there and taking the time to understand that issue even that deeply, there's no downside to that.
Yeah, I think taking the time is the issue because oftentimes you see photo ops, but if you go beyond the photo op and you actually stay there, talk to people who are dealing with the issues, talk to communities, talk to the sheriffs there, I think that's where those important conversations happen.
Yes, I agree.
All right. Speaking of important conversations, the Utah GOP convention happened, and high five to the GOP convention organizers, because it did not last 14 billion hours. I think it only lasted half of that. Greg, you were there.
Yes.
Did it feel fun, or did it feel like, get me out of here?
It is at best a spectator sport for me now. I watch it, and I'd like to watch it from afar. And was reminded why I like to watch it from afar. But I'll say this about, and it's fine, it's good. I will actually give incredible hats off and all the credit to former GOP party chair Thomas Wright. He's been the Salt Lake County chair as well. He was the convention chair, so he was the one at the gavel and at the podium, keeping
Tight
the order
ship.
of business going very quickly, but efficiently. So you had a ton of items of different business items, be it constitutional bylaw amendments, just different things. It was put at the end of an agenda, and the complaint at the beginning of the convention was, you'll never keep a quorum, because as soon as you elect all the different people, everybody will leave to go home, and the state probably hasn't had business done or vote on different issues for maybe a decade. So there was a motion made, and it passed to put all the business items up at before you start voting for the candidates. And that's pretty daunting, because there's a lot of debate that could go on. They narrowed debate to 6 minutes, and Thomas Wright just kept that pro, con, call the question, vote, pro, con, pro. He did, and nobody felt like they were getting fast-tracked or robbed of their process, but they were able to do the most work I've seen in a convention, in an organizing convention, in a long time. And so I hats off to him. It reminds me of him being leader of the party, and that's an art, not a science, and he's just a good leader. So I like that. I like that that it was a close race for chair, but it shows that the delegates weren't all necessarily in harmony, but that they voted. Both candidates made their best case. It was a close vote, and then the Phil Lyman, who did not prevail, was quick to endorse and support Rob Axon, which is the way it ought to go.
I was surprised to see that, yeah. So, Mara, you weren't there. You got to relax from home and not be a part of it. So we're not in the house, but kind of watching from afar. Do you think they did a good job getting things done and making decisions and not dragging this out and making it awful for everyone
the
there?
Republicans are renowned for having a lot of questions about their platform and a lot of questions about policy. And part of it is just how the culture and the process. So, yes, the fact that they could get through it, they had a couple of wacky ones that they still worked their way through, which sometimes go south on people and you end up spiraling down. One thing that was interesting is I was really pleasantly surprised about Phil Lyman saying, hey, listen, he's our party chair, I accept this. His supporters were not necessarily in lockstep. I think one of the things those of us who are watching closely know is that Phil Lyman's supporters are prolific on social media.
Yes, they are.
And they were not happy. And one of the interesting dramas was the complete and utter attack of Mike Lee of being an institutionalist, an establishment candidate.
They've turned hard on him.
It is crazy because he's also the darling. And so it has some fissures in it.
They don't like him because he has supported the governor and the governor has supported him, and so they just automatically
They
Molotov
also
cocktail.
They were suggesting that if you weren't supporting Phil Lyman, then you were an establishment candidate.
Yeah.
So that's pretty big dots. Then they're ignoring a lot. I'm not suggesting that's reality, but that became. I mean, it really turned on social media. So I think social media isn't reality. I think undue voices show up on social media and look like they have more influence than they do. But that was the high drama, is that apparently Mike Lee is an establishment candidate. Now, that was since debunked by everyone. I mean, they defended themselves. I don't want to perpetuate that.
Yeah.
But that's what it surprised me so much when Phil Lyman didn't beat that drum.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Good for Phil Lyman.
I was pleasantly surprised, too, that they threw out the vote they were going to do to try to make sure that you couldn't be a Republican if you were signature gathering.
Right.
So they quickly got rid of that. But Mike Lee was quick to say, okay, let's call on state leadership to get rid of SB 54. Is that realistic at this point, or does everyone just need to take a deep breath and say, Utahns overwhelmingly want to have options and we should allow that, or should it all be party control or else?
I think everything's on the table. I think some of the resistance to revisiting SB 54, although the Count My Vote side has attempted to revisit it by putting additional measures on the ballot, since the SB 54 compromise, but they didn't qualify for the ballot, but they tried. I think it's always open for that discussion with the legislature. I think some of the lawmakers that have been opposed to changing SB 54 or going back to a caucus convention cycle and then having a primary after, some of it was for the races of their own, that they didn't want to have to go through that because they'd had some rough experiences there. I think they could. I don't like the plurality in a primary when you have 5 candidates that are Republican. I don't like the nominee getting 30% of the Republicans' vote at the end of the day. I like to see a way to winnow down to 2. I do like the caucus convention cycle. It's a high participation. Neighborhoods get together, elect their neighbors to be delegates. I
know, but only 2,500 delegates showed up.
26, yeah.
2,560 voted, which is not full attendance. So these are the people who are supposed to be really into their party and care.
Well, this is the organizing convention. Those are the 4,000 that got elected for the nominating convention, and they get almost the 4,000. So they're there for 2 years. So the organizing usually doesn't get the same attendance that the Senate race and governor's race does. I thought it was a pretty good attendance for it being an organizing year. But you are talking 4,000 picking candidates to face each other in a primary. But I thought Orrin Hatch did a great job. After Bennett didn't have a great experience in 2010, Orrin Hatch looked at that cycle and said, I'm going to do it.
That was done with money, right?
I think it's all done with money. I don't think there's a campaign that doesn't use money.
That's the argument against SB 54 in many ways as a money thing. I would love to see the Republicans take a go at taking away SB 54 because I do think it might be something that the citizens actually resonate. They've been given so much more choice because it has shifted to a primary. And I think most Republicans, non-party participants, but registered Republicans, have liked that activity level. And it is a little ironic that very few candidates have opted out of it, including Mike Lee, including Phil Lyman. Phil Lyman couldn't raise enough money. That's why he didn't signature gather.
Yeah, but he originally signed up to be a signature gatherer and started the process.
One of the few purists is Greg. I mean, Greg was a purist about it.
I was.
And
I had the money. I could have
and
done
took
it.
the hits I shouldn't say it that way. You appreciated the process and respected the process you wanted to go through. But it is interesting. I think it would be an error in strategic judgment if the legislature gutted SB 54.
I want to point out though that this caucus convention cycle and how you get to a primary has never been the same always. So in 1992, the very first one I ever went to, there was an open seat for governor, open seat for U.S. Senate, open seat for the 2nd Congressional District, open seat for Attorney General. Very, very big year. Back then in 1992, you had multiple candidates, Republicans running to have the delegates earn their support. You had one vote, and you only got the nomination if you got 70%. There wasn't a runoff. There wasn't a second round, a third round. It was one round. So if you had a number of Republicans, like we did in the governor's race back then and Senate, all of them, it ensured a primary because there was just one vote. And if you got 70% in a crowded field, then you pretty much were the nominee and you earned it. But you can get back to a system where you don't abandon a caucus and convention cycle, but know that you're going to be going to the people for a primary vote. And I think I think we would lose out if we lost those cycles. And the one way or the other, I think it's a false choice. I do think that the caucus convention cycle and how you nominate and by what percentage to get into a primary has changed in the past, and we ought to have primaries. I support them.
But right now we're dual path. I mean, it's not
well,
one way or the other.
Signatures, the challenge with a signature, though, is once you get the signatures, you're just hedging your bet. It's a very different relationship with a delegate when you know you're on the ballot without regard to their support or not, versus I need to be one of the top 2 to get into that primary.
But I would argue this relationship encourages the Republicans to have a better brand, because if you were the certified, I mean, they could go and say you're the Gold Star candidate. It just hasn't meant that much to be the Gold Star candidate. It hasn't meant that much to a Republican voter in a primary to have the sanctioned delegate choice. And that's where I think if I were the party, I'd want to build my brand. The other thing that both parties are missing, they have not increased the threshold. To your point of whose participation, we haven't increased the threshold for at least 30 years that I know of. So 4,000 is not as representative as it was in the 90s and the 2000s, and neither party has lifted. I think
you'd have to raise that threshold to do it. Here's why I like it. I would argue that John Huntsman Jr. under the rules of the time where he had a caucus convention cycle. He worked that cycle very, very hard. He had the means. If it were an SB 54 year, you can get the signatures and you can go through the motions of a caucus convention cycle, but you're already on the primary ballot. Not knowing that in 2004 when he ran a very hard, aggressive, and successful caucus convention cycle, and I think it informed his candidacy and his campaign, him as the eventual winner. I think that he signed vouchers, frankly, into law because of that campaigning that he had done in the caucus convention cycle. I think it helped. I think that the candidates that come out of that cycle have had one-on-ones with voters that they'll never get to have the chance to do in a primary or a general election, and I think it makes those candidates better. But when you do it, you can get signatures. You can go this way. I just think it. I think it loses. I just don't think it's the same quality.
We'll have to dive more into that later because I completely have a different point of view.
Okay.
This is my shock face.
Do we think it's going to come up, though, in this legislative session? Do you think they'll tackle it this next year?
Every year there's pressure to tackle it, so we can guarantee there's pressure to tackle it. Will they? I don't know. I mean, it's not a great year to do it, so who knows?
Yeah. I like having options. It would be interesting to see if maybe you could have like 2 come out of the primary if you needed to and go to the November election. But yeah, I don't know how you change all the rules. Hey, this is just a quick mention of weirdness that happened in Utah this week. But someone on social media, I don't even think they're from Utah, they call themselves Organizer Meme with a little panda face on X, apparently found on the Utah GOP website that it was advertising Thai OnlyFans and Thai sex porn videos.
I think we were all surprised the Republicans were putting that
I know.
out.
I'm kind of confused by this because, okay, for example, right now, most websites, when you go to them, when you allow advertisers, let's say right now, I'm shopping for Mother of the Bride dresses because my daughter's getting married. So no matter where I go, they're showing me the light blue and light pink dresses because they know that's what I'm shopping for. So the question is, when someone goes to this website, if they're shopping on OnlyFans or paying their money there, is that what they get advertised to? Is that why? Or were they hacked, which is what the party's saying? Mara, what happened? Did they just not have a great website that was keeping this junk out, or did something bad happen?
Party says they're hacked through their calendaring system. I'm sure that's what happened. It was funny. The party was a little pinched about it, which they didn't need to be because I don't think anybody really thinks they're putting out porn.
They're not the first to get hacked. I mean, I was running and you do these Zooms, and somebody hacked it and they had pornographic images on your Zoom meeting you're having.
I remember
with
a
these
few
delegates.
of those happening when Zoom wasn't new and people hadn't figured out how to keep
so,
people out.
I just think I think there's people that love to stir it, and so that's just what it is. It's just
stop stirring the pot.
Yeah.
Okay. Wednesday night, which was last night, late night, Congress stripped public land sell-off amendment from the budget package.
Too bad. I hated that.
This was something that Representative Celeste Malloy put in there. The concept was that public land, largely in Nevada, outside of Las Vegas, Reno, and then Utah in the St. George area, where the federal government owns most of the land, and some of that land would be able to be sold off for building homes, et cetera, going on. That was killed out of the bill. Greg, was that a good thing to be killed? It shouldn't have been a part of this?
No, it's a terrible thing to have happened. I mean, we are penned in. We have counties off the Wasatch Front, and if you don't live off the Wasatch Front, you might not realize this, but you have rural counties that are operating on 10% of their land mass of a whole county because the rest is federally managed land. You have such difficult time seeing any kind of growth happen anywhere off the Wasatch Front. If you check the Wasatch Front, our quality of life is going down, our cost of living is going up. The rest of this county is eligible, or state could be eligible for population growth if we could ever see land that you can bring infrastructure in, you can bring water. It used to be a day where you could run water through federal land. You can't anymore. And so it's just becoming almost a form of gerrymandering for the state of Utah when you cannot grow. So this is something that this idea, and this that was going to be in the budget and got pulled out. Harry Reid did this for Nevada long ago. Summerlin, which is a suburb outside of Las Vegas, was federal land. And it was land that was transferred over and made into the suburb and where our kids maybe play soccer and other sports.
Yeah.
I've been there a number of times for my kids' soccer tournaments. But it's not a new concept. Republican former Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke, who's now back in the House, he opposed.
He pushed back on it, yeah.
Yes, and he said, well, his analogy was, well, if you don't like the hotel, you don't sell the hotel, you get new management. Okay, Representative Zinke, go get us some new management. Get us someone that can let us put some infrastructure across these federal lands. It's nice to say get new management. Well, that's then your job. If you don't want to give the state an ability to help the state grow, and that's what this is about, and that's what Nevada's done before and wanted to do again, then you go find a new management for the hotel. But they're not doing that. It's a nice analogy, but there's no action behind it. And at the same time, we keep trying to shoehorn everybody into 4 counties in the Wasatch Front, and we got these counties that are actually shrinking. Why? Because even the parts they can live on, they don't have a job. So their young people are growing up and they have to move away because they don't have industry. They don't have opportunities there in those counties. So they get less representation during the census for the state legislature in terms of numbers. So they're shrinking. While everything's too crowded already here, this language, it's so regrettable. And no state that thinks they hate this has ever had to live under the circumstances that we live in Nevada or in Utah where something like this is needed.
Good kill or bad kill?
Good kill, bipartisan kill. Trump's former Secretary of Interiors who led the charge. It was bipartisan, partly because it was poorly drafted. I'm not against the end result, particularly for Washington County, but it was a really poorly crafted bill. It was way too broad. And I would argue that Representative Zinke from Montana actually understands federal lands as well as we do. They're not quite as full of federal lands, but it's a Western state. And this is not a low information fella. He was Trump's appointee, and he understood the law better. Greg outlined the problem really well, and the problem exists, and we need to solve it.
Well, this was
but
a
we
solution.
often look and say, oh, feds, it's your problem. No, this is our growth problem. We created this by allowing as fast a growth as we had, by having the preferences that we've had. We created this problem. This was not the right solution to it. And I really think we should hear the part where it was totally bipartisan, and it was largely killed by this Republican. I mean, he has a lot of sway. He's very articulate. I think he is also saying go back to the drawing board. He wasn't playing zero sum. This was a really important bill to kill because of its drafting.
Yeah. So watch for it. It could come back on its own, which may be a better thing anyway, so they can get it nailed down and exactly what they're looking for. House members actually passed the big, beautiful bill today. The question is what happens now when it heads to the Senate. I think there's a lot of people frustrated on the Republican side still that we're not dealing with the debt. There's big concerns over that today. Senator Ron Johnson said he's hoping now we'll actually start looking at reality. He says, I know everybody wants to go to Disney World, but we just can't afford it. He's looking for $6 trillion more in cuts over the next decade. Are those cuts realistic? Should they be looking at that, or should the Senate rubber stamp what the House has given them?
This is a tough bill for anybody who's concerned about debt.
Yes.
Because there's nobody who doesn't who disagrees with the fact that it's going to eat into our debt. What's also interesting is the head of the Freedom Caucus voted present on this bill. So if you're just trying to figure out...
Is he asleep, though?
He voted present, which means he's taking a pass, right? It passed by one vote. The House is so different. This is a very small step in a very long road. Senate has different rules. Senate approaches things differently. Johnson did his job well, and his job was to build a coalition and also tip his hat to the president. And the House is much more in tune, I think, with 2-a-year elections. The fact that they have to be highly aware of their money. But you're looking at a bunch of Republicans who have long been hawks on our spending, they're going to have to find a road to like this. And undeniably, this will immediately hurt many Americans, which is why we haven't tilted at those holy cows of services. This also creates, as someone on the left of center, unacceptable carnage for low-income people. In the long run, the reports from Cato
so
and
are you
other
talking about the
conservative
work requirements for Medicaid and
I'm
food
talking
stamps?
about the overall package. It appears as though the net result of this will be that the lowest of low-income people will lose about 5 percentage points, and the highest incomes will gain about 4 over the life of this omnibus bill. The other thing is, I'll repeat over and over, and the Democrats are bigger criminals in this enterprise, but omnibus bills from Congress are just a bad way to do business. Trump's done a very good job shining up a Christmas tree bill, but it's still a bad way to do policy. So I'm hoping that the prevailing minds of the Senate will at least weaken it to be better policy. This is throwing everything in. But you got to give Trump some credit. He strong-armed the House and got it through.
Well, we were staring at a pretty stiff tax increase if they did not take the 2017 tax cuts and make them permanent. And I have always had a problem with the fact that they weren't. In the legislature, I never cut anything that was going to expire, and you'd have to revisit the tax cut you did in 2008 or whatever. Because we keep talking about it like it's a tax cut. It's not. If you're extending the current tax rate, all you're doing is saying, I'm not going to raise taxes by letting it expire. I think it was absolutely critical that we not impose a giant tax and trillions of a tax increase that impact families. I think it was $1,600 per household, and that might be generous in terms of my memory, but it was going to harm people, the tax increase that was coming if they didn't get that done. In addition to that, they did eliminate taxes on tips and overtime to a certain income level. They did. Some people will be disappointed. The no tax on Social Security didn't make it. Yeah. There's a $4,000 tax credit for those who make a combined household income of $150,000. They get a $4,000 income tax credit. Those are good things. I think
aren't these just turning into debt? This is just turning into federal debt.
So this is the tax relief that I think Americans deserve. But I will talk about the debt, and that is this. I think that so many times in government, you're talking what you're going to cut, and entitlements are hard to cut because there's always a percentage, and then without specificity, and then there's the critics of what you're cutting that can now make up the scenario of who you're harming and who you're hurting. I felt like the work that DOJ did on fraud, and in some practices like the Treasury, where they don't even have an accounting system where you know where that money's going and how it's going there. If none of that would erase a debt, but some of that amounts to billions. And you can't find if you can't cut the number of unused federal phone lines, it was $100 million a year in savings. If you can't take 13 million people that Social Security says are 120 years of age and older, not all getting a check, but many are, but certainly not saying that that's a deceased person and having that savings. If you can't get some of those things that DOJ did reflected in this budget with its specifics, okay?
So do they need to chop this up and stop with the one big beautiful bill and make 26 beautiful bills?
They could have put this in here. This is what I don't like. The Democrats are going to call this a nightmare no matter what. They can all vote against a tax increase coming for the American people, and they're still on the side of angels by their own assessment. They're going to look at whatever the Republicans pass by a pure partisan measure, and they're going to demonize the ever-living daylights out of it. Well, since you're going to get demonized, why don't you cut more? There's a ton of things in there that were recommended by DOJ that you could go in and cut that was on fraud, that was on duplicative work that you could save. And if someone wants to criticize that effort and say, well, that didn't amount to too much money, minimally, I'd like to see that in the budget. I'd like to see those, because if you can't cut even what was recommended, where I think it's politically bulletproof because you're specific on what it is. It's not a vague percentage where someone can accuse you of something else, and you can't get the political will to do that, we're never cutting. I think this bill tells me there isn't a moment, unless the dollar collapses, unless we run off some fiscal cliff, that Congress, as constituted, will ever have the discipline to cut the budget. You've got to be able to cut the budget. And you can't say that giving people tax relief or not raising their taxes is how we ended up with a bloated government budget. There are things out there that should have been cut, and they don't do it. And they're not sparing themselves politically. Even if we could go to
2020 funding, they say that we could balance the budget. If we could just revert back to before the pandemic began.
In World War II, you saw the United States spending go way, way up. You know what happened after the war was over? It came back down. Okay, it came to pre-war levels, and it grows, but it went back to where it was prior to a war. If we have pre-COVID budgets, and then we had COVID, and we don't have COVID anymore, I do not understand how we are not entertaining with a straight face, everybody that cares about this country, a budget that reflects the pre-COVID size of the budget, federal government, and its growth, if you want to plug it in, but we don't talk about any of that. It's everything we spent in COVID and more. And that's the part that I am just, if the Senate doesn't pare that back, and I've never looked at the Senate being the budget hawks that are going to do all the hard cutting, but if they are, I will be very happy, because I don't understand in the circumstances we're in right now, and the types of cuts you could make, and explain that they can't find the political will to do it. I would even say that the tough part in the House, where they were arguing to take the tax deduction off of what you pay in your state taxes, you could reduce that. You can use that to deduct from your federal tax. Like Utah actually has this, we're like the only red state. Most of the blue states take full advantage of that tax deduction. What you pay in your state taxes, you can take off your federal. And there was a big push to stop that exemption and not allow that to be exempted. Well, I can imagine why that's a very, very hard position for Republicans who represent congressional districts where Kamala Harris won that congressional district. And they rely heavily on that deduction. So I get that part. But I'm talking about the DOJ work, the work that was done to find efficiencies, the things that could have been cut in that budget that they ignored. If they're not doing it now, they're already going to be called, killing grandma, starving kids. It's all going to be said. So go ahead and make the cuts. And they didn't. And they
For
didn't.
me, where the
so
disconnect is, DOJ has penned out at only in the low billions in terms of their cuts. So when you need to cut $1 trillion and you're cutting in the low billions, that's spitting into the wind.
They're not cutting in the low. My problem, Mara, is that they don't even have the courage to cut in the low billions.
But I'm saying DOJ is not moving the ball when it comes to debt deficit.
It's a tell.
And
it's a tell
right.
of a complete lack of fiscal discipline whatsoever, that they
but
can't even take
those numbers
cuts.
are not accurate. I mean, the accuracy of what they actually did will be so inconsequential that it won't solve the problem.
Which is crazy. The billions are
but
inconsequential.
But they're selling a little bit that they're solving problems. And that's the problem I have, is that they are giving Congress a reason to not get serious because DOJ is acting like they're making a difference. They're not. They're doing a lot of things that are just agenda items that they want to cut, but they're not making a consequential go at balancing the budget. I'll remind us that the last time we got serious about having a smart fiscal policy was under Bill Clinton.
1991.
I'll give you that.
And they did hard with the Republican helping it.
Yes, with the
and
Newt Gingrich Congress.
They had a mutual goal that this was in the best interest of the country, and they weren't using it to take cheap shots at each other. So until we get serious-minded people back again, then we're not going to see any.
But here's the and this isn't. This is just to frame this issue for those that are listening. You just heard what Mara said about DOJ, its efforts, its decimal dust. It doesn't matter. When RFK Jr. was before the House committee on his health and human services budget, and he was asked by a Democrat, why do you want to deprive my constituents of health care? He pointed out that the cuts that they were doing, and they were the work of DOJ. It was the stuff that was duplicative. It was the waste. It was the things that were going to people that weren't eligible. They were looking for ways to be efficient. So you have a cabinet secretary that thinks there is a budget to cut and cut efficiently. You have a narrative that you're actually trying to deprive my constituents of health care. Both can't be true, okay? I tend to think that there is waste in federal government, and I tend to think it wouldn't be all that hard to find because they print so much money, $36 trillion and $2 trillion extra every single year. I don't. It is not beyond the realm of possibility that we can cut.
Let's not go that far down, because I'm going to show you how those cuts are misplaced and ill-achieved.
Okay.
Well, I hope our senators take it seriously this summer and it just doesn't turn into a giant vacation where we end up where there's no choice and no time to debate and no time to look over this. Where
we're not going to pass a budget on time.
Can't we please, Mara? Don't.
It's pathetic. I tell you,
I know.
If they can't cut, and I think there's plenty to cut. I think you just use the Bill Clinton model. They found it. I don't.
It'll never happen if they don't do it now. I feel like
that's exactly
this is
right.
like their chance.
If it's not done now, we can give up on all the talk. In the next campaign round that comes in, someone wants to tell us they're a budget hawk and they're worried about the deficit. You just show them the door. If they can't find things to cut in this current budget, and I'm talking small, I'll give you it. That's not giant, but they're not even cutting that. So.
And it's not going to be fun. We were even talking this week where there were a lot of parents upset in the Murray School District specifically, where they thought that DOJ cuts were taking away some of their summer school for elementary age children. That was actually just the ending of CARES Act dollars that came from the pandemic, where they had extra money and they were coming up with new programs. And once you have those programs, they're good programs. They helped families, but the money isn't there anymore. Right. And so there's going to be a lot of programs that help people, are good out there.
Now, to make it
clear,
have to go the Republicans, the Trump administration is not talking about overall reducing spend. He's talking about where we spend it, how we shift it. So everyone is still wanting more. And the everyone in that is everyone. I'm not I'm not eliminating anyone from that. So we're still not looking and asking ourselves, we're not talking about a foreign investment. We're not talking about bonds. We're not talking seriously yet.
Yeah, and we can't even, you just have to, if you can't, this is why Elon Musk this week tapped out. And I don't blame him. If he's going to get absolutely excoriated for the work he's doing.
He only had 120 days with
and
his
he was like,
position,
Yeah,
though,
I don't
anyways,
think,
right?
I think he did.
But
I think he's
even
a
his
flash.
PAC, he's not going to get involved. He says, I've done all I can do. I'm just going to, I
And
don't think he's
also
getting
the
involved.
fact that his businesses are tanking.
But there's no one that money means less to than that man. So I don't think that's the reason. What I
that's
think
not
it
what
is.
he's telling his board of directors.
Well, what I think it is, and what it has to be, is you can't put that kind of personal capital, personal money, put everything he's done, and then look at a Congress that can't take up any of it and do anything with it. It's spitting in the wind.
I would venture to say I'm not sure that Elon Musk has given us that much.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. Lightning round we've made it to. I want to get back to housing. We were talking
we
about
never
some
talked
of the
shooting in D.C. of the diplomats.
We can talk about that. We're going to get to a couple national issues, but really quickly, housing density is coming up again. In his monthly address, Governor Spencer Cox was saying that there's going to have to be some uncomfortable, hard conversations this year with cities from the governor about building high-density housing. This is a push and pull we've seen going on where cities and counties don't want to be told what to do. The governor feels like they have to be told. Do you feel like the governor or the state needs to step in to make sure that we have the housing to make it affordable, or is this just not the place of the state and local governments need to figure it out on their own?
State needs to do more to work with local first. I know they've done some things. I'm not saying they haven't done anything, but our state taps out really instantly. They get very impatient, and locals deserve a chance, because the one thing that the locals have pointed out is that they don't also create the demand. Citizens create the demand.
Yeah.
So they need to be pressured, they being the counties and the cities, need to be pressured to do more. But for the state to move away from dialogue to mandates, it's just a short-sighted move. The other thing that was poo-pooed, but I'm going to support it, is the governor said we need to do a little bit more to change the dialogue around density. I think in Utah, we hear density and we think of like Chicago housing that's going to go awry. It may be just how grandma stays in the same neighborhood and the grandchild takes grandma's house. Like, we can think of it as places we want to live. We need to open ourselves up a little bit more to different kinds of housing. And we are a little old school about how we use it. So I supported Governor Cox's assertion that some of it needs to be a public relations campaign about what we're talking about. But for the state to say they've done all they can to dialogue with the municipalities is just not something I agree with.
I'll tell you that I think this is being seen through the prism of the Wasatch Front, and it's a mistake. And I think it's the reason why locals are not seeing eye to eye with the state is they're closer to the people that they represent. And there isn't a land use meeting that these cities are having where they're not filled with people saying, no, thank you, we don't want this. We don't want the higher density. We don't want the nature of our neighborhoods and communities to change. And I think that people that live in the Wasatch Front at this point are well within their right to say, we have put as many people as we should in 4 counties out of 29. Why don't we see the rest of the state grow? If the state has a role, it's for infrastructure, it's for roads, it's for water, it's for sewer, it's for rail. We need to see the rest of the state open up for growth, because the cost of living is lower as you get off the Wasatch Front and your quality of life gets higher. And I'm going to tell you that it is a guaranteed, if you are serving at the will of the people and you need people's votes, you go tell the people that live in the Wasatch Front they are going to take high-density housing whether they like it or not, and I'm going to do a PR campaign to tell you why you're wrong, and that elected official is going to be on the wrong side of that conversation. I don't care what they say. These 4 counties have, and its people inside of it, have had it with growth. They are feeling it in every way. The cost of living, again, housing, the traffic congestion that's all day now. It's done. This box has been checked. If this state is going to grow, then the state has to be serious about growing the state, not the 4 counties that you see all this growth. You can keep piling people on top of each other. It's not going to make the people aren't going to be happy with this. And so I think you can legally say you can force cities to do something. Politically speaking, I think this is an absolute lose of an approach.
Yeah. The other poor form, I'll just say, is where he gave the passionate speech was in California.
I know.
I was like, that seems like a mess.
Speaking of things outside of
He's
Utah,
like,
I told you
somebody
guys
repeated
today,
that in there?
I was
Darn
going
it,
to
it
keep
was in
this
Utah.
podcast today to 45 minutes. We're like 10 seconds away from
Whoa.
that. Do we end with our local Utah politics, or do we want to hit national for a few minutes? I'll let you choose. Voting? All right.
What's the local? What are
Okay,
we talking?
you wanted to mention that there were 2 Israeli embassy staffers killed in
Yeah.
Washington, D.C., near the Jewish Center, and that happened last night.
'Cause I
You
wanna
get a
pose-
20-second response.
Okay, I want to pose a dilemma of which I don't understand. This isn't even a position I have. I am personally against political violence. I don't know anyone, certainly in this room, that supports political violence. Right of center, left of center, I'm against it. I believe in the battle of ideas. You have a country when they're polled about the pro-Palestinian or pro-Hamas movements that have been on these campuses, the river to the sea and push them out, the infantada, whatever it is, free Palestine, you name it. It is frightened students. It has seemed to be incredibly hostile to a student body, and many Americans support President Trump in trying to get that what we're describing as anti-Semitism out of these campuses. So you have a poll of Americans that supports the effort to lower the temperature, get this type of rhetoric and this presence on campuses away. You see this guy that shot these 2 members of the Israel embassy, these diplomats who were killed, who was saying the same things that you're hearing on these campuses about free Palestine and infidada and all the things that are saying in these campuses. You see in this assailant last night, and there was an interview on CNN where a student at Columbia was a member of that embassy and saw what happened and saw in the look of the eye of the assailant the same look he saw in the people that were protesting on his campus. Where I am blown away is that when you poll Jewish American voters, they by majority oppose President Trump's efforts to not give grants if you have anti-Semitism and you have these hostile messages and on campus that are threatening Jewish students. The Jewish Americans are opposed to what President Trump's doing. So here I sit, and I don't want to see these things happen to these kids on campus. I don't want to see people murdered in D.C. at an Israeli museum and these diplomats, these young kids getting killed. There are people that are saying that when you give it permission and you legitimize it here, it just keeps going. But Jewish Americans are opposed to it. So if they don't want to fight or they don't want to push back on that, why do I want to? I do not understand how that demographic who is being targeted by this is opposed to pushing back or trying to stop that.
I'll let you have way more than 30
yeah,
seconds.
I don't have an answer. I'm just totally confused by that.
According to the Anti-Defamation League, anti-Semitism in America is at an all-time high. That's unacceptable. We have to ask ourselves what's going on and think about it. It's never acceptable to kill people in the name of your political cause. I mean, everyone agrees with that. It is completely fair to be pro-Jewish and also to be confused and worried about what the Netanyahu administration is doing in Israel. And there are a lot of really concerned people about what the government in Israel are doing to the Palestinians in the name of this horrible war on both sides. What we can all agree on is that killing 2 innocent people is just unacceptable. So I think that dialogue stops there, because that has to be a hard no for all of us to just say that action is never acceptable.
Mara, and in all sincerity, and not in an argumentative way, why does that not spread to, we can't let students that feel fearful
words
on campus?
Words are different than actions. That's a tenet in America.
Don't you
and
think
when
that
do words turn to
violence, doesn't it?
Words are different than actions, Greg. That's why I can't be arrested for when I'm that mad at you.
They prohibited those kids from being able to travel or to be in certain parts of the campus. That's
actions
worse than words.
Different than words, Greg. I mean, we have to keep the boundary of what I say to you. Now, we have defined.
So you're defending hate speech?
When words, Greg, that's unfair, right?
Well,
and I'm not going to go there with you. Where I'm not going to elevate this, but we have well-defined laws in America when words become inciting. I mean, as you saw, the Democrats asserted that that Trump incited violence. So clearly claims on both sides of when words become inciting is real. But when people are protesting, and when they're protesting civilly, we have a long history in America of supporting that action, even if we disagree.
It wasn't civil, Mara. I mean, they're shutting down buildings. They're holding the
I answered the
referee,
question for you, Greg. That was my point of view.
Okay,
I understand you have a different point of view, and I understand that,
I just think it's
that you're in a
I think
place
it's a
where
little
you
more
want to
hostile.
arbitrarily.
I just think
I'll
it's a little
also
more
say
hostile than
that
words.
by and large, you saw this brings up a today's story about a judge putting down a long-term indictment against the Trump administration and saying, you may no longer deport these. We have not found one student that has a criminal record, and they put an across-the-board stop to Trump because they so disagree with what the administration is doing with students.
Here's one thing we can agree on to end this with. Cancer sucks. President Biden
Cancer
has
sucks. Too bad he
just
has
told
it.
us on Sunday that he has a very aggressive form of prostate cancer. We're not going to hash out what the national media already has right now. But as we're listening to new books coming out about the president right now, one of them being Original Sin, written by CNN's Jake Tapper and Alex, I've just lost his name, from Axios. I feel bad, sorry. Anyhow, I've been listening to some of those interviews, and I think that we should all be concerned as Americans about the health of our presidents, what they're releasing about it, because we're learning now from this new book that the Bidens, while Beau Biden, his son who died of cancer, was in office in Delaware, was hiding his own cancer and not telling people about it. So I think this opens up a conversation that hopefully we can talk about as we move on, I'm sure in the weeks and months ahead, that we really have to have elected officials who are honest with us about whether or not they can do the job, which I think is a frustration with a lot of people right now. Mara, do you think that's fair?
Yeah, I mean, I think this has been going on for a really long time. I think what's intriguing about the book, which I haven't read, I've just read the New York Times excerpts. What's intriguing about that is the vast indictment that I agree with is that they knew this condition during the campaign. Like, that's sort of the interesting indictment of his folks closing hold there is, to your point, how early they knew that and how early they were starting to.
This book says as early as 2016, and like the later you got, the worse and worse it got, the more they covered. But
I think the part that's hard for me is that I for Jake Tapper to write this book and receive any money for writing a book about something that he actively participated in. I mean, they went out of their way to demonize anyone that said that there was a cognitive decline with Joe Biden, and they absolutely denied or rejected the premise that that could be the case. They said, you're picking on him because he's stuttering. It's not that he has any decline at all. You're not in no situation to be able to make that kind of accusation. And the guy that says that, Jake Tapper, is the one that now wants to tell everyone how this was all true and profit from it. It's like, I think... I don't know.
I think both can be true, though. I think here's what I think is interesting. I think that a lot of the national media didn't want to see it, didn't cover it. Maybe their ownership didn't want to. But at the same time, so I think there should be accountability for not reporting on it. And I think hindsight's always 20/20. So I think there was purposeful not reporting. But I also think, too, that there's a lot of people who know that they will lose their ability to report at the White House when you have people at the White House saying, you can't report this, and you would like to think that doesn't happen, but I can look back to the COVID pandemic here when I was reporting on some of the side effects from the vaccine, and that didn't last very long because all the way from government leadership to we're talking county health departments, hospital systems, wanted that to stop. And if everybody who has money, control, and power wants that to stop, at some point it's very hard as a reporter to do your job because no one will talk.
It is
no
a
one will
symbiotic
platform
relationship, and you have to take that into account. Tapper's defense of Greg's accusation is that he was lied to. I mean, that's what that's what he's.
Well, and I'll tell you what if you're a member of the media and you carried their line, and
he was probably lied to and closed his eyes a little bit.
They are saying, I mean, in reviewing the guy from Axios whose name we don't recall, he had the most. I thought it was the craziest story that in one of the interviews with a Biden administration official, he came back at him and said, "Hey, you guys bought it. Like, we couldn't believe it." He said they said this. They said we said things to you that we didn't think you would actually accept, and you did. And so you have some responsibility because you bought some of the things we were saying that we didn't think would ever sell. And so I just look at all that and go, you got to be kidding me.
I think we would miss the boat. We should indict Biden. I'm not trying to remove the view from Biden. But to your point, I don't think this is an isolated incident, and I think we need to look at our whole structure.
Are you
and how we're
curious
going
who
back.
was actually making decisions, though? If he
They
wasn't
named
doing
5
it?
people. They said it was a very small circle, and the
I will
chief
also
of
say
staff for
both of them said that when
Alex
that
Thompson.
he was never
Alex
in
Thompson.
remiss of his duties. I mean, they are still asserting, they being these 2 authors who are indicting the Biden administration, are also saying that our government was never in harm, and that for the important, he was not absent and was not unable to make a decision during the important times. That is not to take away the indictment that he
I don't
shouldn't have
think-
done it.
Are you sure?
It's the same folks who wrote
you seen
it's
the-
the same
her
folks who
interviews?
wrote it. So if you're going to buy what they're selling you got to buy all of what they're selling you.
I'll look at the book. I was never going to buy it because I didn't want to reward the people writing it. But it's actually worse than I thought. I thought I had a pretty good grasp on it, and the stories are pretty. They're a lot worse than I
It seems
thought.
to me
so
that
I'm
they did
curious
get
to
some
buy
people on the record, but there's still a lot of people who want to give them information, but because of people wanting to keep their power or whatever, because everyone likes power, they didn't want their names on the record as well. I would even look back in account of my own reporting, and I'm disappointed in myself when I look back at Senator Orrin Hatch, because I don't think we ever publicly went on the air and were like,
Right, but
maybe
we all
he
knew
should
it.
be
I mean,
the
the
senator.
3 of us all knew.
But we all knew that he was
didn't have
diminished.
the wherewithal in his last years.
So I recognize that in myself.
and
because-
his staff was doing the staff work, and we all knew
Yeah.
that.
So I think that there is blame. I think there's time for self, introspection and thinking about, what needs to be reported, what shouldn't. And so anyhow, I hope there's lessons that are learned from this as we move forward. Yeah.
Happy Memorial Day.
Happy Memorial Day. Are you doing anything fun, Greg?
I'm hanging out. I'm gonna be a homebody.
Okay. I actually took the day off just at the last second because I realized we had a full staff on Memorial Day. And I'm like,
Nice.
why is this happening? I'm going to go stay at home and pull weeds.
I'm going to go see the Rockies and the Yankees tomorrow night. I'm going to
Nice.
spend the weekend in Denver with my daddy.
Have they won 10
That'll be
games yet?
fun.
Those Rockies.
We don't worry about their record, Greg. And we're a split household. I grew up as a Rockies fan, but then when Denver got a team, I switched. I grew up as a Yankees fan, sorry. When Denver got a team, I had to switch leagues and teams, but the rest of my family, diehard Yankees.
So if Utah ever gets a team, do you think that you will become that
No.
or no? You
No.
just will. Okay.
No.
Rockies
All
are
right.
8-42. You're not even in double digits on wins. Now I say that as a Pirates fan, where I think we're
You know
at like
what,
15
Greg,
wins.
we're
so
about the art of the game.
Well-
we're really about it just enjoying the pastime. Our win-loss record means nothing to
Nothing.
us since
clearly,
the 90s.
and
I like
I'm
that.
in the same
Like,
boat
Utah
with the
Jazz
Pirates.
fans need to take on this
Yeah,
attitude.
we're fine.
We're
We're
fine.
okay.
Yeah,
It's
we're
just
okay.
the
Yeah.
beauty of the national
We're
pastime.
thick-skinned.
We're all okay. Thanks for hanging out with us. Enjoy your Memorial Day weekend, and we will be back with more Utah political drama coming up next week.